Okay, so the webinar started. Attendees are joining right now. I'm going to have this go live on the streaming service.
Okay. And that means LMC TV?
Yep.
All right. Tell me when we're all set.
It's still loading.
Yes.
It does appear. Should be live now on YouTube.
Okay, we ready to start then? And then just, could you look out for Richard when he comes into the waiting room?
Yes.
Okay, thanks. Okay, good evening, everyone. Call the meeting to order. This is the September 22nd, 2001 meeting of the Village of Mamanic Planning Board. Before we get into the agenda, we have a couple of administrative items to take care of. We had a public hearing on an application for Forest Shore Road that was adjourned to tonight. The applicant was not ready to come back to us. So planning board members, I need a motion to adjourn the public hearing for Forest Shore Road to our next meeting, which is October 13th. Do I have that motion?
So moved.
And to second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Okay. People who are paying attention to planning may notice that we're missing a formerly key person who worked in our planning department. Amber Novak left the employment of the village last week. So as a result of that, we do have some issues that we have to fix because we just don't have anyone in that staff role. So there's some errors on the agenda that got posted to Novus and errors on the agenda that got circulated to the planning board. For some reason, those were two different documents. So I'm going to list the errors, and then I need a motion to amend the errors from the planning board, and we'll have to vote on it. The first one was on the agenda that was posted on the website. It shows that 1205 West Boston Post Road was coming before us tonight. They're not ready. They're still before the zoning board. So that was an error. So that has to be removed from the agenda. And also under item 2, the approval of the minutes. The minutes from July 14th, 2021 were approved at the last planning board meeting, which was on July 28th. And the July 18th meeting should be the July 28th meeting. And then we'll work on those minutes tonight, and that'll bring us up to date on the minutes. So I need a motion to approve, to amend the agenda.
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, and we are in a little bit of a flux, unfortunately, with the loss of the key step person. So I know there's been some confusion about documents being posted to Novus and not being posted to Novus. We tried to provide them to people who asked for them today. There is a staff person who's being trained on how to upload things to Novus. Hopefully that'll be fixed by the next land use meeting, because this affects all the land use boards. And also there's been questions about how to contact us and to whom to send comments to. And I think we had 4 different people receiving emails with comments for tonight's planning board meeting. So that'll also be addressed as soon as possible with a process put in place with one person who then will know what to do with the email and the comments and the any communication that comes in for the planning board. So I apologize to people, but we started to plan for the departure of Amber, and Hurricane Ida hit right away, and we just everybody got totally sidetracked, and unfortunately it took a lot of the key village people who had to help us do these things away from working with us. Okay, I think that was everything that I was supposed to do. That brings us to the first item on the agenda, which is minutes for the July 28th, 2021 meeting. Did anybody have any comments, questions, concerns with the minutes? No? Okay, then I need a motion to approve the minutes as presented to us.
So moved.
I'll second it.
Okay. So we'll vote on the minutes. Cindy,
Yes.
Richard,
Yes.
Ellen,
Yes.
and I'm recusing myself since I was not in attendance at that meeting. I did watch it though. Okay. All right, this brings us then to our first application. We have 1258 East Boston Post Road, which is Toyota City. It's listed as a wetlands public hearing. We are going to open the public hearing. It was determined after the public hearing, after the wetlands permit application was received and some analysis was done, that there are no wetlands there and we do not need to do a wetlands permit. So we need to open and close the public hearing, and then we can move forward with the review of the application. Am I doing that right? Stop me, people who know if I'm doing this wrong. Okay, so I need a motion to open the wetlands public hearing for 1258 East Boston Post Road.
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All right, thanks, Ellen. Okay, so does everyone agree that you reviewed the files and the findings and you've seen the memo from AKRF, our planning consultant, basically informing us that there are no wetlands present on the site and we do not need to do a wetlands permit? So if everyone is in agreement with that, I need a motion to adjourn.
Kathy, why don't you just see if anybody has any comments on the application while we're open, while the public hearing is open?
On the wetlands permit application?
Well, no, just on the application itself, since they might have expected to have an opportunity to comment.
Oh, okay, but we usually do an opportunity to comment when we, regardless of whether we have a public hearing open or not, but
True.
I love it when the lawyer follows the law. Okay, before we close this, does anybody have any comments on the Toyota City application at all? They've been before us before, discussed this, the information is on. It's where the vacant lot is, where the club used to be. They're talking about putting up a small sales building and a lot and another facility to sell automobiles. Does that sums it up?
That does, Madam Chair. Leonate here for the applicant. I'm happy to give a summary of the application. I didn't want to get in the way of any.
Of our like housekeeping items, right?
Certainly.
If anyone from the public wants to speak on this, please raise your hand. Ashley will let you in to the Zoom meeting. Nope, yes.
There's one, I just unmuted Farah.
Okay,
Hi, good evening. Can you hear me?
yes.
Good evening. I'm Farah DiMaggio. I'm a property owner at 1204 Sunnyside Avenue.
Okay.
So this is,
You're behind the site, correct?
yeah, so our property line, we share a property line with the Toyota City property. There is fencing there. There is a retaining wall that I saw in the plans, and I'm just going to mention a few different things, and then perhaps they can just comment on the questions that we have. The first question is if they are going to reinforce the retaining wall that's there. The second question is, how is the vertical landscape going to be addressed in terms of green screening and, the views from our property over the commercial property? Because, we're residential, this is commercial. And we are concerned, my father-in-law, Mark DiMaggio, I think is on the call as well. We're concerned about the lighting and where the direction of that lighting is going to be focused, as well as the height of any of the shrubs. I saw them in the drawing, but I couldn't quite make out how high they were going to be. And if there was going to be maintenance of the trees, because there are some large trees there which do provide screening, but some of the branches are unwieldy and over the property line at this point. So just the attention that is going to be paid to that boundary. And then I did not see an exit or entrance to the parking lot off Sunnyside, but if you could just confirm that there will not be any entering and exiting of vehicles onto that street, because as it is, it's very hard. There's a lot of obstruction there in terms of visual getting on and off the post road from Sunnyside Avenue. It's quite difficult because there is a pillar and a wall there. So if you could just elaborate on the plan and how you've considered those aspects. Thank you.
Certainly.
Thank you. Mr. Napier, do you want to address any of those questions? I mean,
Absolutely, yeah, Ken, I didn't know if there was anyone else in the public that had any other questions or comments, that we could tackle them all at once, or?
Is there anyone? While Ashley's looking to see if there's anyone, I just want you to know that we're at the, even though the application's been before us before, at this point in time, they have to go to ZBA. They need to have a zoning board. They need to have, I think it's a special permit from the zoning board. I don't think they have to go to HCZM, but the building department determination said they did. So that's one thing we have to figure out internally. And then when they come back to planning board after their time in the zoning board, we will be doing an extensive review of the site plan. So that's not going to happen tonight. Questions, the things like the vertical landscaping and the lighting and how the lighting is addressed in the trees and the entrances and exits and traffic and whatnot are things that we will address during the site plan review. Okay.
So, and if Mr. Wolf, if I could just, perhaps I could clean up some confusion. If I could share my screen.
Yes, you should be able to share your screen.
Okay. So this is the site plan. When we initially filed this application, we were under the impression the Beaver Swamp Brook runs proximate to the site. And so when we initially filed the application, we were under the impression there was a 100-foot wetland buffer off of the brook. We were subsequently advised that there is a shortened 50-foot watercourse buffer, and therefore we should take a look at the watercourse itself. We did provide the board with an analysis from Evans Associates that found that there was no wetlands in connection with the brook, and therefore that eliminated the wetland permit aspect of this application, which I think, unless Frank disagrees with me or Ashley disagrees with me, would also eliminate the need to go to HCZMC. So just from a procedural standpoint, we will need to go to the zoning board for a special permit and then ultimately return to the planning board here for site plan approval, unless I have that incorrect.
No, you have that correct. Because it doesn't involve the wetland permit anymore, the action or the project falls under the threshold of does not fall within the threshold of being considered an action that requires harbor coastal consistency.
Okay, so that changed. Did you all get any water on the site with Ida? Because the Beaver Swamp Brook was well over its boundaries.
I am not sure. I mean, it's a vacant site now, so I'm not sure how much water they took on. I know the village did ask our client to temporarily store vehicles there that were damaged and flooded out during Ida. So if anyone's driven past the site recently, you may see cars that are currently being stored there. Those are not Toyota City cars. Those are resident cars that the village has to stash there. And then with respect to Mr. Maggio's question, I'm not sure if she's still on the call, Farah. Can you see the screen here? are you,
You can see the tree.
is she up, the next one up? I just wanted to point out, we have two lots. And so the lot that is in question is closest to the curb. There's a residentially zoned lot that I believe is between the subject property and Mr. Maggio's property. That lot is residentially zoned and there's no proposed activity on that lot. So this retaining wall, the trees, everything else that is going on that property is proposed to be left as is. It's not proposed to bring the development out onto the residentially zoned portion of the property. So there
Okay.
will be some separation between Mr. Maggio's lot and the subject property here.
Okay, good to know, but how is that residential lot going to be maintained? Because I just don't want it to end up being filled up with junk or,
Yeah, I mean, it certainly
Um,
is going to become a junkyard. I mean, as far as maintaining, pruning the trees and whatnot, I can speak to the applicant if there's things that have fallen into disrepair there. The idea is not to turn it into a refuse yard for tires and engines and things like
yeah,
that.
that's our concern.
No, I mean, at this point, it is meant to be left fallow, so it'll remain kind of in its current state and undeveloped. There will be a kind of a edge of asphalt and a landscape boundary surrounding this property, so there really shouldn't be anything spilling over onto that site.
Mhm.
If Alan Pilch is on the call, he may be able to speak to the height of the landscaping we're proposing here.
Yes. Alan Pilch, the engineer and landscape architect on the project. There are trees that are being planted along that northern boundary. You can see them shown there. There's six, there are six, I guess it's called blue spruce, Pinus pungens is being proposed, and Junipers virginiana, that's the three at this end. They probably get 20, 30 feet tall. And the intermittent shrubs are all, everything that's being planted there is evergreen. And the evergreen shrubs that are being proposed get 6 to 10 feet tall. So they will provide screening of the vehicles that are parked there because we're talking about, it's all evergreen planting. So the intent here was to provide screening from the residential district into the property. And as I say, the trees will get 20, 30 feet tall easily. And the shrubs, 6, 10 feet tall very easily as well.
And then with respect to lighting, we don't have a fully developed lighting plan. We saw that was one of the comments from Kellard Sessions as well, back to the board. So that is something we will work on in the timeline between your board and the zoning board. We will address that comment and come back with a fully developed lighting plan. Certainly the intent would be to have everything downward facing and shielded and directed away from the residential neighborhood and towards the lot. Modern lighting plans, I'm sure they'll all be LED and very little spill offsite. There is no intent, as you can see on the plan, there is no intent to have an active driveway on Sunnyside. There is a current curb cut and driveway entrance. That was one of the comments Kellard Sessions raised as well. Initially, the thought was to not use that actively, but to leave it open just in case there wasn't a need to jockey cars in and out or so. I can speak to the applicant about whether that's needed or if that's a programmatic change that we can have on our next round of plan revisions. And I think that addressed, Mr. Maggio, if I missed anything, let me know.
If I may make a comment, I'm Susan Oakley, Tarabella Lands Design, the landscape design consultant. If you look at the landscape plan, one of the proposed plants or shrubs have the notation IC. That is Ilex crenata hetzii, and those only reach 3 to 6 feet tall. So if height is an issue for the neighboring properties, perhaps the landscape architect could replace those plants with something that reaches the stature of the other screening plants.
I'm sure that's not an issue. I can talk to Alan about that.
Fine.
Okay. I think we got a little ahead of ourselves here, but it's good because you have a heads up on some issues that would have come up later on and you can get a jump on them.
There are still 2 hands raised.
Okay.
I'm I'm going to take Pharaoh first, and then it's Stuart Tiekert afterwards. So, Farah, you're unmuted if you'd like to speak.
Oh, thank you so much. No, I think I've got most of my concerns addressed. I do like the idea of replacing the lower grasses with something of equal height. And
They
Understood.
look like grasses, but they're shrubs.
shrubs, okay. But if it could be like a solid wall of green, I think that would best protect you know, the home from the lights coming in and out.
Thank you.
And, you know, just the activity on the parcel.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Stuart, you can unmute yourself.
Thanks. I'm just looking at the online agenda. Has a SWIP been submitted with this? And I don't see one there, so I'm just asking that question.
There was a stormwater management report that was filed, and I believe it's Stuart. If you're looking, it's part of the planning submission. So it's one large file that contains not only our cover letter but
Okay.
also all of our consultant
There's
reports.
one big document that has several documents in it. It's called planning submission.
I will take a look at that.
Okay, we're at
Thank
the
you.
beginning of this process, so we have, time. But Kellard Sessions did a nice, did a memo with a lot of questions, and I apologize that didn't get onto the website. As I said earlier, we are, missing some staff people at this point in time. The key person who did all of that stuff is no longer with us. But I do believe that you may have gotten that package by email from the planning department.
Yeah, I got some things, but I'll take a look at the website now that I know that it's encased in something else. Thanks.
Yeah, okay. Okay, thank you. Is there anyone else?
There's one more. Mark?
All right.
Mark, you should be able to unmute yourself.
Yeah, and I have a couple of, my name is Mark DiMaggio. I'm a co-owner of the property at 1204 Sunnyside, which is a residential dwelling. And I had a couple of questions regarding, well, one question was similar to Farah's, which is there a proposed entrance or exit on Sunnyside? Either upon completion or even during the construction period, because that is a very tricky area for visibility going down into the post road. There's a lot of kids coming from Rhinebeck that cross there. It can be really very hazardous. I'm concerned about the safety of those kids, as well as anybody driving an auto going into Sunnyside or out of Sunnyside. That's one of my questions, and I think that's important to know. During construction, are there going to be big vehicles going through there, in and out, in trucks, construction equipment, et cetera? Or is that exit or entrance not being used at all during construction and or after the construction is completed?
I think that's something that we'll have to work out with the applicant as we get further along. That is a good point to raise. There is a lot of foot traffic when the kids are walking to school and when the kids are walking home through past there. So we may want to look at that as we look at site plan and some restrictions maybe on time or something.
I have two more questions, if I might. One is about signage, because on the north side, on the corner of Boston Post Road and Sunnyside, there's a large opaque Toyota used car sign that really is, a danger because it really blocks visibility when you enter the post road or when you come up in Sunnyside. And I'm concerned again with the, cars going in and out, as well as the students from the school going back and forth. Having lived there for over 35 years, I've had some close calls. And I'm concerned as to whether they have applied for a certain kind of signage that would be on the south side of that corner, which is near the lot where the proposed construction is going to be.
Once again, it's too early in the process to get to that level of detail with signage. Frank Tavolacci, our building inspector, there he is. Frank, I don't know if you heard the concern about the current signage that Toyota City has on the Boston Post Road and Sunnyside intersection, about how the residents saying it blocks sight lines when you're pulling out, when you're coming down. And so he was concerned about any signage, any additional signage that may go up with this new facility. But I don't know, if that current sign is compliant with the sign code. That would be something that you'd have to look at in your shop.
With that, when they do their final plan, will that be part of the proposal, or would that not be addressed at that time?
It's usually not addressed by the planning board. It's usually addressed after construction by the building department, because it's a separate permit for the sign that the building department handles. It's not.
Okay. My concern is that, when they put the other sign up, the one that I think is obstructing visibility, it's on the north side, north Post Road. On the other corner, we never heard anything about that sign being constructed. We found out once they did it that it was an opaque sign that really was a visibility detractor.
All right, we're going to have to take this offline. That would be something between you and the code enforcement department, if that sign is not legal. So
okay,
gotta move the agenda for the planning board along. I'm sorry to do, but we're kind of getting far along into this process when we're not really at the site plan review phase of this project yet.
Okay, so if we have any additional questions, when will that be the appropriate time?
The current sign you can address with the building department right now. Any future sign will be a separate permit process between the applicant and the building department when the construction is underway. And I'm not sure exactly when they start that process, because it's not part of this planning board review.
Right. Okay, so we'll be apprised of it as things are going along, so we don't find out things after the fact.
I don't know if there's any notification necessary for a sign, there's
not just the sign, any other questions we have, but the sign included, yes.
Yeah, I mean, you might have to kind of pay attention to there's no land use board involvement in sign permits.
Could I just ask one more question, which I think is a concern? We had a very big flooding down there, just below the property on the south side. There is a brook there. There's water, and I understand that you're saying it's not a wetland issue, but in fact the water did rise above, and I'm concerned about the drainage there, because even though it may not be a wetland proper, it definitely is an area that floods up, and cars couldn't even get by after that last flood. So my question is, why is it not considered a wetland if there's a body of water that runs down there, right alongside the building construction site, that overflows when there's heavy rainfall?
Okay. There's legal definitions for wetlands and water courses. And if Ashley or Teresa wants to explain that, there's actually no wetlands there. It's considered a water course. And there was a lot of flooding on the Beaver Swamp Brook with ice, and south of the site there, right at the top of the parkway, there was extensive damage done, and there's a telephone pole with
That's my concern. My concern is that they don't sidestep that, because.
But this particular piece of property is not. It probably wouldn't affect that, as it's uphill from it. So
well, it runs alongside as well.
It runs close, but not part. It's not adjacent to this piece of property. There's another piece of.
As long as that's being addressed, and that it has been addressed, I'm concerned, because it was very bad flooding.
Yeah, I think we're all aware of the impacts of the flood, but unfortunately, the Beaver Swamp Brook people didn't get as much consideration by the community as the people from the Mamanic and the Sheldrick rivers, which was much worse. But there was terrible flooding along the Beaver Swamp Brook this time too.
Okay, thank you.
So I have a question that's sort of related to that. I know on the coastal assessment form that the applicant submitted, they did check off that they were adjacent to a critical environmental area, which I assume is Beaver Swamp Brook. But we have information that indicates that it's, it doesn't need HCZMC review because, and we don't need to do a wetlands permit because it doesn't meet that part of the code. I just want to make sure that we confirm that. But I guess my other question is for Mr. Keller. Since the square footage of disturbance is large enough to require pre-treatment of the water on site before it's dealt with, because it's going to have cars parked, multiple cars parked on the lot on a regular basis, is there any higher standard for that type of usage of a property versus just anybody else's development of the same number of square feet that would just have to do pre-treatment? Is there a particular pre-treatment option that's better suited for this kind of location?
You could use a pre-treatment option, which is similar to a first offense unit or a storm scepter unit, which removes not only trash and sediment, but also oils. And one of my comments to Alan was that although he addressed the retention requirements and the water quality requirements and has addressed them fully to what the regulations require, he didn't have pre-treatment included. So possibly that's a method of incorporating pre-treatment into the plan, which could also protect the waters from any oil drippings that could come off the parking lot.
Yeah, because as the chair pointed out, that parking area is higher than the riverway down below. So if we follow the laws of gravity, it's a problem. So I just wanted to make sure that we look into that.
Yes, that water that comes off the property will run into the river eventually. What doesn't infiltrate into the ground, any overflow will end up in the storm drainage system on Boston Post Road.
And then that goes to Long Island Sound. So
Yes.
okay, thank you.
Okay.
Madam Chair, I could respond to a bunch of things if you'd like, or I know I have answers for some of Mr. DiMaggio's questions, and or I could hold until we're back to you for site plan approval. How you'd like me to approach it.
Okay, well, do you have, why don't you just?
I can be quick.
Yeah, we'll get it on the record and we may have to delve into them further as we get into our site plan review, but sure.
Understood. So Mr. DiMaggio, with respect to the entrance on Sunnyside, the applicant's intent is certainly to have the focal point of all traffic coming on and off the site on Boston Post Road. I mentioned earlier that we had not presently shown the closing up of the access point on Sunnyside. That would be kind of a emergency access point. In theory, I'll discuss with the client whether or not we can close that up or if that's needed in order, just as kind of a fail-safe. But the intent is certainly to have all traffic coming on and off the property on Boston Post Road post-construction. I'll have to discuss with Alan and Rex the construction sequencing plan, whether or not there's going to be any access coming off of Sunnyside. But certainly, as we come back to the planning board, we can work through that issue. We can also get some direction on the signage and have some proposed signage location on our site plan. That shouldn't be a problem to show. With respect to the wetland question, I just wanted to note that even though we're not within the wetland buffer, the flooding issue is separate and apart from a wetland issue. And so there is a stormwater plan that is being reviewed by the village's engineering consultant. We'll be required to prove out that there'll be less stormwater coming off this, or less or equal stormwater coming off this site post-construction than there was pre-construction. Just so that everyone's aware, in case you haven't been out there, there is an underlying, this was a parking lot before. So even though it looks kind of grown over at this point, there is a sub-layer of asphalt that's underneath kind of what's growing through it now. So there is a lot of hardscape on site currently. I believe post-construction, there'll actually be less asphalt overall because we'll have a green buffer around the perimeter of the property that doesn't currently exist. And then Cindy, to your question, and I could be wrong about this, but I believe all of from 95 over towards the sound, basically the entire corridor of Westchester, from Port Chester all the way down through New Rochelle, that entire boundary is all a critical environmental area. So when you're doing the online EAF mapper, if you're in any town east of 95, it automatically turns that checkbox on. So it's not this site's proximity to the Beaver Swamp Brook, it's more of its proximity to the Long Island Sound, and it hits everything that's east of 95. That being said, we got Mr. Kellett's comments. We'll take a look at doing some pre-treatment. But I don't think that should be an issue at all.
Okay, thank you. Okay, before we conclude, we still need to close the public hearing that we opened for the wetlands. So I need a motion to close the wetlands.
moved.
Any
So
second?
moved.
Second.
Okay, thank you, Ellen. Okay, Richard,
Yes.
Ellen,
Yes.
Cindy,
Yes.
and I vote yes. Okay, this, as we said before, this applicant will go to the zoning board at this point in time. They need a special permit, and when it comes back to the planning board, it will be a fully legal application, ready to go and ready for us to do a more thorough and in-depth site plan review. In the meantime, our landscape architect consultant, our landscape consultant and our engineering consultant have given them comments on the application as it stands now for them to work on. And so we'll see some changes and whatnot when it comes back to us. Okay, we're good? Everybody fine? All right, let's move on to the next item on the agenda.
Cool.
Some of the members of the public may not have been here in the meeting, so I'm going to repeat. We have 2 new applications. Actually, we have 4 new applications tonight, but there are 2 in particular that have gotten a lot of attention from the public. The next one, 715 Mamanic Avenue and 572 Van Rans Place, and deservedly so, because these applications are coming to us right after the area that within which they sit flooded terribly. And both of these are in the flood zone, and both of these will flood with the next flood that is that large, and we're not unaware of that. I want to explain to everyone that we are here tonight to do our secret typing for these so we can start. This is the first time the applications appeared before a land use board. Both of these applications also have to go to zoning. They're requesting multiple variances, and they have to go to the HCZM before they come back to planning for our review of the application. So you can rest assured. Ashley, could you remove the non-panelists from the panel? Thank you. Rest assured that there's plenty of work that's going to be done. And this is just the beginning of it. Oh, good. Now I can see everybody's faces better. So that said, we have site plan review and special permit before us for 715 Mamanic Avenue. Let's see, where's my, sorry, I'm trying to get myself organized here. Okay, so we'll start off with a presentation by the applicant on the project, or the applicant's representatives by the project, and then our planning consultant can give us some comments on it. And tonight, our goal is to type this, actually type it for secret and declare the planning board as lead agency. So, okay. So if you are a participant to do a presentation on this, please identify yourself so Ashley can promote you to the panel.
Good evening, Michael Stein with Hudson Engineering.
Hi, Michael. Michael, where are you? It looks like you're in Greece.
Paris.
I can't see totally. Oh, yeah. All right, who's going to start? Mr. Noto?
Where is it? There, scroll over. It's on. Okay.
All right.
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I hear you.
Okay, you can hear me. I'm trying to get the video.
We can't see you.
We can hear you fine if you want to just get started.
Well, okay. Of course, I'd like to be seen, but I am on, and you can hear me at least. Okay, so while I work on the video, good evening, and thank you for having us. Paul Noto, I am for the applicant G2D Group, and Madam Chair, you laid out pretty much the procedural issues before us, and we concur. You know, timing is everything, and this is awkward timing considering what happened to the community on September 1st. With me this evening, though, is Greg DeRosa, one of our principals, Noel Rogers, our architect, Elizabeth Cohen, also an architect, and Mike Stein is our engineer. The project, 715 Mamanic Avenue, it's in the C1. It is in the TOD overlay district. It's currently an empty office building. It's been empty for about 3 years. Our proposal would be to demolish it and build a 21-unit residential building with a mix of 15 two-bedrooms and 6 one-bedroom units with storage, a business center, and a fitness room on the first floor. Obviously, all of this was designed prior to September 1st. We did receive memoranda from Ashley Lay and John Kellard. So we are aware of some of the comments from them. And of course, I agree with Ms. Lay's comments with the exception of one of the variances actually on 4E is a 8 feet required, 3 feet proposed. But other than that, her analysis was accurate. I'd like to have our architect Noel take you through the project, and then Mike give you the overview of our stormwater plan. And then, of course, if people has questions, of course, we'll answer those that we can, but we do understand the next step is we would, after you declare yourselves intent to be lead agencies, we have to go to the Zoning Board of Appeals because we do have a number of variances we need to apply for. So if that, I'll turn it over to Noel, if I can.
We can't hear you.
Good evening. This is Noel Rogers. Nice to have everybody on board. Can you hear me?
Yes, now we can hear you, yes.
Okay, just a brief description of the building. Obviously, it's in a nice location downtown. It's a prominent corner property. It's a relatively tight site for us. As Paul had mentioned there, we did come up with a 4-story building. We have a mix, as he said, of 21 units, so 15 2-bedrooms, 6 1-bedrooms. We tried to bring in a brand of mixing other units, other buildings in the area, to try and get a mix of between a modern and a traditional building and try and pick up the elements from around the other areas to make it very compatible with the local streetscape. It, as we said, is a relatively tight site. We basically wanted the main focus of the building to be on Mamanic Avenue. We had to juggle around with the tightness of the parking lot. So we basically had a one-way in, one-way out of Jefferson Avenue and exiting down at Van Ranst Street to the rear. It really is a tight site, and we tried to get as much in there parking wise as we could. We realized that parking is obviously a big concern. So again, the layout of the building is, we are aware of the FEMA requirements and where the elevation of our occupiable residential space is. So our residential levels are up above the FEMA requirement. We do have some spaces on the first floor, that we are aware that we're obviously going to have to address, with some kind of openings that'll let water pass through if necessary. We are aware of the flooding condition up there, and unfortunately Ida did a lot of damage recently. So we put spaces down here that we typically wouldn't consider as occupied spaces. We took areas like our electrical switchgear and whatever. No, we can't have them down there. So we're proposing to put those on the roof, as just to get them out of the potential for water. That's really all I have on the general layout. Unless you would like, to ask me any further questions.
Hold on, there we are. Why don't we continue with the presentations, and we can hold any questions from the planning board till the end. Paul, is there anyone else who is?
Well, yeah, Mike Stein.
Right, you said Mike, right? Or as we call him, Michael.
Good evening, Michael Stein with Hudson Engineering. Just to first take a look at the existing site, the parking lot, the existing parking spaces, there's approximately 20 in here, but these spaces are not, they don't meet the village's requirements for dimensional requirements. So that's why we didn't keep this arrangement. As we move in through the circulation, we'll have one way in, one way out. We angled the spaces along here so we could reduce the width of the access aisle. And so they're about a 60-degree space. And they're the spaces under the building. I know Mr. Keller had brought up that they're not deep enough. We have a 6-foot sidewalk that's between the parking spaces in the building. So we could always reduce that to 5 feet to provide the 19-foot depth. But overall, this is the circulation coming in and coming through to access in and out of the parking area. We did do field testing in the area where we're proposing to do the stormwater system. We got down to a depth of 96 inches with we encountered groundwater at 96 inches, and we had very, very favorable infiltration rates for the soils. So we're basically taking all the stormwater from the site between the roof and parking area and infiltrating into the ground for all storms up to and including the 25-year storm event. So from the site in the proposed condition, there will be actually less runoff coming from the site and to be contributing towards any flooding that has happened, as we're very well seen coming through the village those nights. Also, there's going to be some incorporation of green roof, and which would further reduce the amount of runoff coming from the property.
Okay. The highlights. Anything else? I mean,
just whatever question.
Mr. Keller had a lot of comments and sent you.
Yes, and we did receive their comments. Obviously, we'll work on addressing those before the next meeting. A lot of them are just some housekeeping and minor comments. I know it was brought up about an emergency plan for flooding, and that's part of the items we'll be working on addressing.
Right. I think one of the things that we learned in Ida is, we're putting multi-story buildings in the flood zone there, and we're not putting dwelling units on the first floor, but everyone lost their cars. So somehow the message has to get out to the residents there that when they're asked or told to evacuate, that flash flood warnings, that means they have to evacuate or at least move their cars or get out. But that's something we can address later on. And obviously there's some traffic pattern changes too that we might want to address. Paul, we still don't see you. Is there anyone?
I'm still here though, and
I know. I see your name.
and I got all dressed up for this too. So, what a disappointment that my machine isn't working properly. So yeah, I think at this point, I know that you are, this is the, very early part in the process. And if you want to open it up for questions, and we'll answer those that we can, but as you've acknowledged, there's a lot to do here. And this is just the very, very first step.
Right. And I would, I would really ask the public, unless it's a pressing question that you feel we need to address as we go forward, since there's so many questions that are going to be raised at both the zoning board, the Harbor Coastal Zone Management Commission, and the planning board. We might not be able to answer them at this point in time, but I don't know. Why don't we hear from our planner at this point in time then, and sort of add to the knowledge, and maybe that would help the public and the members of the planning board sort of gauge where we are right now and the scope of what we'll be doing in the future. Okay, so Ashley, you're muted if you want to weigh in on the memo that you put together with regards to this project.
Sure. So where we are is this project does need site plan and special permit approval from the planning board, but it also requires a number of area variances from the Zoning Board of Appeals, and it requires Harbor Coastal Zone Commission's consistency review. So the first step for the planning board in this process is to declare its intent to be lead agency under seeker, and that will open up the environmental review process. I'm recommending that this be classified as an unlisted action under seeker, which means that they need to complete the short environmental assessment form, which they did, and the board has the ability to ask for some supplemental information if they feel that it's necessary for them to complete their environmental review of the project. When the board declares its intent to be lead agency, there's a 30-day circulation period. And after that, you would then be able to declare lead agency, and then you could complete the seeker process. The options either to have a negative declaration or a positive declaration. A positive declaration would require the preparation of environmental impact statement. Typically, a building of this size would not necessarily go to an environmental impact statement. I think in this case, with it being an unlisted action, you could request some additional information about the flooding and other concerns, and that could be addressed through the environmental assessment form process. Ultimately, if they're able to mitigate all those impacts within the project itself, you could potentially reach a negative declaration.
Yeah, I think, with Ida so fresh in everyone's mind, one of the issues that came up was with, the addition of more multi-story buildings down in the area, that first responders were rescuing people who were in their homes on upper floors of even private homes. And there were quite a number of rescues, and they were even doing them the day after the storm. There were that many people that needed to be rescued. And here we would be adding to that a burden to our first responders. And, we don't even have the capacity in the village of Mamanic to handle these deep water rescues at this time. We rely on mutual aid. And of course, we weren't the only community that was hit. Portchester was hit very badly. Rye was hit badly. Parts of Marietta were hit badly. So we have to be mindful as we do our environmental review of the impact, not just with this one building, but how it fits into the whole. And we'll be working with the emergency responders, the fire department, and the police department with regards to their capacity to be able to deal with as the climate is changing, and everyone agrees that these storms are going to be more frequent. We're just going to have to figure it all out as we go forward. So.
And certainly asking the applicant to provide supplemental analyses that address those specific issues and how they're going to mitigate those concerns is something that's appropriate for the board to ask for during this process.
Okay.
Well, I'd just like to confirm that you're recommending an unlisted action as opposed to a type 1 because
the number of units that are proposed and the overall size of the building don't meet a type 1 threshold.
Okay, so it's strictly based on the legal definition of type 1 versus unlisted.
Yes.
But But depending on how this analysis goes and how the applicant makes changes or what variances they're granted, having an unlisted action would not preclude us from asking for an environmental impact statement.
No, it wouldn't preclude you from reaching a positive declaration if you feel that the mitigations that they've built into the project aren't fully addressing those issues. It also doesn't preclude you from asking for supplemental analyses as part of the EAF process before you decide to make your secret determination.
Okay, that to me sounds like a bit of a piecemeal approach, whereas if it comes to the point where it's a positive declaration, just requiring an EIS would cut all the bases. I'm very concerned, as the chair said, about the cumulative impact of all these buildings, even the newer buildings that were put in when TOD, the zoning overlay, was enacted. Those buildings had a lot of flooding on their first, the ground floor and the next floor up. So I'm less concerned about the stormwater management on this individual property, because when you have 10 or 12 feet of water coming in, no one's controlling that. And you've created an island with 21 units with however many people that they're going to be stuck in their buildings. And that plus the other building, and then all these other things that are coming on board. The village never did a generic EIS when they passed TOD, which in my opinion, although they were urged to do it, they wouldn't do it. They wouldn't spend the money. And here we are putting more people in harm's way. And the 100-year storm is not a fantasy. It is a regular occurrence. So I have a real problem. I understand that it's a tight site. Well, it's tight when you want to maximize your profit. That's terrific. But don't put people in harm's way and property in harm's way. And then the spillover, because once these people have to be evacuated, that means someone else has to wait to be evacuated. I don't think we can stress our first responders unless they can tell me that they absolutely have the capacity to do this building and the next building and then the next one after that. This is not a minor application in my mind. I think the engineer has a tremendous number of points, regardless again of zoning. So, this property is already low. I think this is a big deal.
My question is, how do the first responders decide whom to rescue first? Where do they go first?
Like rationing healthcare
first? I mean, people, like I said, people gotta wait till into the next day, and I don't know, even beyond. I don't have the details. I mean, things were happening so fast. I tried to get some numbers from the village. I had communication. Teresa and I had communication with the fire chief, and basically he was like, "Well, I can tell you what the fire department did." But the police department also was there doing stuff, and DPW was also there doing stuff. So it's too soon in the aftermath to have like a sort of an accounting of what happened, if we will ever have an accounting of what happened. I'm going by news reports, what I heard about how many people were being rescued, and they were still rescuing the next day and things like that. So yes. I agree. This is a big deal because it's not just this one building or the two we have before us tonight for this. It's the effect of all of them coming on. So,
well, yeah, if I may, I don't disagree with what Cindy said. Although I would obviously be reluctant to suggest that it's incumbent on this particular application to do a DEIS when the village may or should have done one when they did TOD. But certainly we acknowledge that this is a serious issue, and obviously it doesn't serve our purposes to put people in, our residents and our tenants in harm's way, or to exacerbate an existing problem. So obviously everything we do is designed to make it better. But I do think in the macro sense is what Cindy was referring to, is how going forward is the village going to look at as you said, the cumulative, projects. Having the status quo, I don't think is great. This building is really not it's an eyesore, and it's not a benefit to the community. We could also have buildings built up like the medical, the open door next door, but then your streetscape would be horrible. So we sort of have to, think of this in a larger sense. And I appreciate that your comments, because I think that's what you're trying to do in the context of this application and some other ones. And the ones across the street that are much bigger than ours and I'm not sure how they fared in the storm, but everybody got hit pretty hard. So this was, a pretty horrific event. And it's hard to, as you know, plan for something like this, because obviously there's nothing we could have done in this building or any other one that probably would have mitigated what happened in Ida. And I don't even know if the Army Corps project that we keep hearing about, if it ever gets done, if even that would have really done anything in reducing the impact of this storm. So.
Well, actually, I can tell you a little bit about that based on what the Army Corps' original information in the 2017 analysis. At best, it's looking at a 4.5-foot reduction in flooding. And that's only in one area. I'm not sure where this particular property would be, but if you have 12 feet of water, 4.5 feet less is nice, but it's not solving the problem. So if anybody is out there suggesting that the Army Corps plan, even if it's done, is going to solve our flooding issues, they're deluded.
Well, that's why, well, thank you. That's why I asked the question, because I'm like you, I'm not entirely convinced that is the be all and the end all, although that is apparently the only plan on the table. And there are people out there, as you know, who are promoting it as, in fact, the solution to all of our flooding problems. But, be that as it may, we certainly understand where you're coming
something
from.
to hope for.
Yeah, but we certainly understand where you're coming from, and we're certainly going to make sure we get you all of the information that you need to make an informed decision about all of the aspects of the project. And we understand it's a long process.
Okay. We've been referring to the communication from Kellard Sessions, our consulting engineer, again, at the beginning of the process. So they obviously had lots of comments. I don't know, Mr. Kellard, if there's anything that you want to add to that. We don't need to get into a lot of detail. I thought your memo was so thorough. It had so many pages. I didn't even print it out because it was so preliminary, because there were so many things that you were asking them to do. I said, all right, this is great. I don't need to print this out because things are going to change.
Yeah, I don't think I have to repeat it. A lot of the comments were housekeeping comments. Mike designed a solid drainage plan for the project. I don't think I had any comments on it at all. I complies with the regulations. The difficulty here is the FEMA, the floodplain.
Right.
As we all know, we had probably up against this building 6 feet of water during Ida.
At least, probably.
Yeah,
Right.
the parking garage across the street, I think, was almost up to the outdoor deck.
Right.
So it's trying to figure out how you can develop these properties while not having property loss and
Right.
being able to make sure the
Well,
residents are safe.
Well, the flood zoning is to put, the living spaces above, hopefully above the flood, so that you're just losing there's minimal property damage. The problem with that, and I can speak for this personally too, because, I'm in an evacuation area. If there's a coastal storm and we did get evacuation notices. I evacuated once and the next time I didn't, because nothing happened. People get these evacuation notices and they don't take them seriously. Unfortunately, they don't, it's not going to happen and whatnot. And meanwhile, then they get stuck and they have to be rescued and they lose their vehicles, So at the very least, luckily, no one in the village of Mamanic lost their lives. So, okay. All right.
Sorry, before we move on, the president of the development company would like to speak. I think he's had his hand raised, if that's possible.
What is his name?
Oh, there's Paul.
Got it.
You put a tie on.
I wasn't kidding. I got all dressed up for this.
All right, Ashley, could you tell us the person's name so Ashley can promote him?
Greg DeRosa. Is he on?
He's been promoted. He should be able to unmute himself now.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi.
Okay, we can hear you.
Okay, great. Thanks for hearing us tonight. And really sorry for everything that you guys have been going through up there. I'm sure it hasn't been fun. The existing building is about 10,000 square feet, plus or minus. That means that if the current owner of the property planned on renting this building as an existing office building, you'd be looking at roughly 70 people there. You also wouldn't have to go through any improvements or updates to the site plan. So I would ask you to look at that and understand what it is now, right? Instead of trying to look at what we plan on doing to it, because what it is now is not a great situation for anybody. And if we're only building 20 or some odd units, having 20 people as a tax on first responders is a lot different than having 70 people stuck in a building. So, you know, I'm completely understandable to what everyone is dealing with, and I get it. I don't want to take anything away from that. Our intent is to make the site better, and certainly not negatively impact the community. So that's what we want to do, and that's what we've done in the past. So I just wanted to say that. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Okay, so we need to type this as an unlisted action and declare the planning board as a lead agency.
Intent to be lead agency.
Can we do that in one motion?
Yes, you can.
I make that motion.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Okay. Ellen,
Yes.
Richard,
Yes.
Cindy,
Yes.
and I vote yes.
Okay, thank you.
Now, you all have to go over to both HCZM and to the zoning board before you come back to planning.
Correct. We'll go to the zoning board first. Obviously, the variances are pretty
Right.
critical. So if we don't get those,
You don't get those,
we won't be
right?
back in front of you. So we
Right.
will we'll work on
Right.
that and make whatever changes we have to make or go to the zoning
Right.
board first. And then hopefully we will be back to you shortly thereafter.
I would like to point out that this board, the planning board, will need to make a secret determination before the zoning board of appeals is able to act on the project.
Okay.
Act on the variances, because if this board becomes lead agency, you would be responsible for completing seeker under coordinated review before the zoning board of appeals could issue any variances.
Right. So we will be simultaneously before the two boards and you're doing the environmental part.
Okay. Okay, so we have 30 days now for the intent to be declared. And then once that 30 days is up, we have a certain amount of time to actually, so we'll have to come back and start asking questions and do a review of SECRA. Okay, thank you for pointing that out. I didn't realize that either.
We will be back and forth between the two, but yes, we're happy to do that.
Okay, this application, is there anyone who wants to add anything that, point anything out that we didn't already say? Is there a hand, there's a hand up, okay, Ms. Van Eyck. Okay,
Hear me?
yes, we can hear you.
Okay, I wanted to ask you, I was a little unclear on why you, or how you can go forward without a floodplain development permit application. Not only is it vital that we have this, but we also have to have the FEMA rules looked at and included in the development of this building. That's part of the New York Building Code now. And I'm concerned because initially they're saying in their plans that this elevation appears to be, let's see, the FEMA flood map shows the base elevation at 25.8 feet. So it seems to be that it needs to be higher because the plans on the, that they were submitted have 21.5 feet, which there's a 6.3 foot difference. There's a lot of little nuances here that need to be looked at that I think are being misrepresented or not looked at properly. And there are some statements that are very upsetting to me. Because I sat through the flood. I watched my house surrounded by water. I'm only about 400 feet from this site. I heard men in the park calling for help for hours as I sat there. There's no cell phone during these kinds of emergencies. I hope you can realize that. So you can't call for help. You have no electricity. When I heard these people stop calling for help, I assumed they were dead. I find out the next day that there was a man at the top of Jefferson who's brought his kayak down and was going through Columbus Park trying to save the people, the men that were screaming. Not first responders, private citizens. You know, we have a floodplain problem. I don't care basically if Mr. Noto or anybody else thinks that raising buildings up are horribly ugly for some kind of a line. We need to be exemplary at this point. We rely on FEMA flood insurance. If we don't follow the FEMA rules, all of us can lose our standing in this village and lose our flood insurance as well. And that's a burden on this board. This has to be a positive declaration. It is going to have a massive effect on the environment. Traffic, forget it. You can't have an entrance on Jefferson Avenue when people are trying to come out of Grand Street, hit Mamanic Avenue and turn in, and someone that's going to be trying to get a parking space could hold up traffic in all directions. It's massive accidents. That's the least of it. Watching cars float away, seeing people in these buildings so that these people can maximize their profit is not something we need to be concerned with at all. We need to be super concerned about following FEMA building regulations, which are part of the New York State Building Code, and that these plans are looked at with a fine-tooth comb because what they say and what they present are not always matching. We had a lot of gasoline flowing. Now it rains. I can still smell gasoline and on my lawn. You can come by and you can smell it. There's a lot of fuel, a lot of damage, and there's no way to get people out. It's a flash flood. So building more, putting more people in harm's way, it's not the way to go to maximize something for someone that says they want to make a corner look nice. This has nothing about looking nice anymore. Look at Speedway right now. It looks like a bomb went off. Elliott Avenue, Ralph Avenue, the flats, everybody lost everything in their first floors. This is massive death. We're at the bottom of the watershed. We're not high. And we have to look at this with a different lens now. And the lens has to be through one that helps this village through the future, not today. There are other countries that have a lot of things they do for flooding. We have to start thinking in that direction, and we cannot give these positive and negative declarations for something that is definitely going to have a positive effect. And they have not provided the engineering and the floodplain development permits. These have to come also, variances have to come from the state with this now. So I hope that's all taken into consideration when you look at this, because they talk about these percolation rates. I don't want to hear that nonsense. We're on an aquifer. What something does today versus when it rains and the aquifer is filled up to the top are two different things. This water goes nowhere. It's ground flooding that killed a lot of people, as well as the wave of water that came over their heads with the sewage in it. I lived that. I walked through that. I watched my friends lose everything. And I don't give a damn, Mr. Noto, if you don't like a building raised up in the air. They need to be raised up to save lives now. We are at that point. The reservoir is filling up with silt. The huge environmental impact statement that should have been done and wasn't done needs to be looked at, and this building needs to be looked at in the floodplain development permit for its effect cumulatively on everybody else and everybody else's effect that's going to happen to it. So you could be home, whoever these people are that want to build it, live where you live. And when people are dying and they can't get their medicine in the refrigerator and have diabetes and have strokes, because that's what happened, there's no electricity for days. You can't get electricians, you can't get builders. People are waiting still to get stuff out of their basements. It looks a little better because the village workers broke their backs trying to bring the garbage out. So we don't see it as much anymore, but walk in their homes. I dare you to. And I'd love for you to come to my house, all of you, and we'll have this conversation in private and in public as we walk this river. And maybe you should be at my house when this happens and you watch yourself surrounded by water. But you have to make a positive declaration on this, and they need a floodplain development permit because the Department of State Building Codes has to be involved in this now because it's in a floodplain. And that can be only at the top of the list in any consideration now.
Okay,
And
thank
this is what's trying to be avoided.
Okay, we know, not everyone on this panel went through this. I mean, a lot of us have been involved in the aftermath. I know Mr. Keller has been working with the village and walked the sites, and of course Frank was, been down there. We get it. Okay, we get it. We will do what we can within the confines of the law. We will make sure that we're following the law, and we will, I think we showed that we understand the issue, what the issues are. Okay, I know it's upsetting for people. I mean, I've had my basement flood multiple times as well. I wasn't as, and I lost everything that was in the basement. So, we get what people are going through, and this one was the worst ever. And so many people are homeless right now, and so many people lost everything. And this board will do what we can within the confines of the law to make sure.
But you are not, you're doing this tonight and you're not having a floodplain development permit in front of you. You have to follow the
Just
code on that.
beginning the process.
But that is the first part of the process.
We have started the process. We have given the applicant comments of things they need to do. Okay, so
that should have been handed in the beginning. It should never come to your desk. It shouldn't have been heard tonight until that was handed to you.
Okay, but
it's in our code.
I can't change the past. Okay, we can't change the past. When something comes to us from the building department and is referred to us from the building department, by law, we have to address it.
And you address it by saying it's incomplete. Walk away.
Thank you. Thank you for telling us how to do our job. Okay.
Maybe somebody should, because it's not being done correctly according to procedure.
All right,
except for the developers.
Thank you for your comments.
You too. Thank you for nothing.
Thank you. I'm sorry, but we're doing the best we can here. And all right. We're good.
Good. We understand what we have to do, and we'll.
Right.
We're ready
Ashley
to
and
move on.
Teresa, could you just double check to make sure? I mean, the FEMA regulations have been addressed in your memo, Ashley. They're written into the village code. As far as any additional information, any additional paperwork or permits, could you just double check and let Mr. Noto know what he needs to submit before the next time he comes before us? If there's
I did speak with Michael Stein earlier today and referred him to chapter 186 of the village code. And
all right, so we followed up on these comments. We got Ms. Van Ive's email earlier today, and we've already followed up on her comments. Just because we didn't go into that level of detail at this meeting doesn't mean it didn't happen. Okay, great.
There are two more hands raised, but since this is not a public hearing, it's at your discretion to take those.
This is not a public hearing. I personally think we've heard enough. Do any members of the planning board disagree with me? You feel like you need to hear any more? We're getting repetitive.
It's all going to come back again.
And it's all going to come back again, right?
Let's move the agenda.
Can I see whose hands are up if I look?
Yes, if you click on the participant box and you click on attendees.
Okay. I don't see hands up, so.
It's Larry Cohen and
Okay.
Stuart.
All right, let's just move on to the next application.
Well, can I just mention that certainly anybody, if they're watching this meeting later or wanted to speak now and will not be, they can certainly submit comments in writing.
Absolutely.
The village, and that will be distributed to us before the next time this hits our agenda. We really can't do anything substantive until the zoning questions are dealt with. Legally, we can't. So,
Well, we have to do secret, as we found out tonight.
yes, but that's not all that substantive. And there's a lot with this, and there will be a lot, and this is going to take a while, as Mr. Noto said.
Right.
Also, if they do submit comments to you, you can forward them to us. That would be helpful, and we can address them, promptly.
Yes.
So that way you don't
As
have to
a
wait for the
matter, Right. As a matter of course, and this is something we have to correct, I don't think you got the comments that came to us today.
No,
Plus the person who would normally do that wasn't there to do it anymore. But
that's okay. But Suzanne McCrory did send me her comments.
I know, she sent them to
Sounded very
us.
similar to Gina Vibe, so.
right, and thank you very much for sending them to us because we didn't get them.
Okay, I didn't know you. I sent
So
them-
we ordinarily, when we get comments from the public, and it's helpful if we don't get them we got some very late this evening on one of the applications. Not everybody got to see them. But it's helpful to us, and we do normally send them right to the applicant when we get them and post them on the website as well. Okay,
Okay, thank you.
thank you. Let's move on to the next
Good
item.
evening.
And I'm trying to just organize my papers here. Thank you. Which is an application from 886 Oriente Avenue. So Ashley, if you could switch participants. Now, this is an application. This is a site that's been before us before in the recent past. It was a subdivision that was it's on Oriente Avenue. And then the applicants from 886 came back for additional changes to the lot lines. And now they're here to amend the site plan that were approved back in November of 2020. They want to construct an in-ground swimming pool. So there's obviously to review the site plan again, and then there's stormwater management that has to be done. And I think Ashley, correct me if I didn't get that all.
That's correct. This was previously classified as a type 2 action under seeker. And so at this time you have comment memos from the landscape architect and from the village engineer.
Right. Do we have to type it again? No.
No.
Wait, it's a private home, so it's type 2 anyway. Okay. Okay. We have, Mr. Stein.
Hi, good evening. My
Okay,
name is Frank Marcella, fellow
okay.
members of the board. I'm the architect here in Mamanic. So our application involves a swimming pool to a single family residence, as you've outlined. We started our filing process in May. We did attend the architecture review board in July. At that point, we were initially prepared to come to planning before the architecture review board, but we were told we didn't need to go. And then when I was at the BAR meeting, we were advised to come to planning. So we did accomplish the architecture review board before coming to you. There were no issues at that board. So our application is a simple swimming pool parallel to the north property line in the rear. Like every pool, there's some small bluestone terrace work around it and a little trellis. There'll be fencing put up to meet building code for safety. There's an abundance of landscaping for privacy to the neighbors. It's a fairly large piece of property. It's over 1.6 acres. We also I have on the call the engineer and the landscape designer available for questions. On September 17th, we did receive comments from Kellard Sessions and Terabella Land Design. And we've looked those over. And again, I have the engineer and landscape architect available for, if those comments could be addressed. And I guess I can answer any questions.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Does anybody from the board have any questions for the architect at this point in time?
I was just wondering about the fill. It's
I think
talking
that's for the
about.
engineer.
Oh, okay,
Yeah,
you're right.
I'm
That's the
reading.
engineer.
We're doing things in order here.
Okay.
Keeps us organized. Okay. Ashley, do you have any comments on the scope of the project? Anything that you want to add or subtract or?
No.
All right. Okay. As was mentioned, Kellard Sessions and Mr. Keller did a review of the project before this first meeting with them, something that we've instituted to move things along a little bit faster. Used to be you had to come to a meeting with the planning board first before the reviews began. So there was an extensive communication from Mr. Keller that went to applicant and went to Mr. Stein. And in my mind, that's where the issues are going forward. Everything else seemed to be fine with me, but and as Cindy mentioned, the fill, but I don't know who wants to start. Mr. Keller, do you want to just sort of give a summary of,
I'd like to just clarify, Mr. Stein is not the engineer of record.
Oh, okay.
Rob Frangione, who's just
okay.
hopefully appeared in front of you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, yep, he just popped up. Okay, thank you. All right, so you would be, I mean, we don't, you just got the memo, we understand that. You'll obviously have to come back, you'll have to respond to it, and you'll come back. For those of you who, are people watching this who are not familiar with what our process is, that's our process. We're not going to, the planning board is not going to, respond to verbal responses to it. It's just not something that we can process. We need to have everything in writing for the record and everything. So maybe you want to hit some of the highlights, Mr. Keller, of what some of the issues are. And then Mr. Frangione, if you want to, just summarize or just, the answer that we're looking at this and we'll get back to is perfectly acceptable. Okay. John?
I just have one comment. So if we address these comments with the consulting engineer prior to the next meeting to a satisfactory level, I would assume another meeting, we'd be able to resolve this. I mean, we need to satisfy the engineer, is that correct?
Yes, yes, you need to satisfy the engineer. If our engineer is happy, we're happy.
All right, that's
as long as nobody else on the planning board has any other issues except for the stormwater management, and as Cindy mentioned, the amount of fill. So there's a little bit more complicated issues than we normally see with a swimming pool. But let's get into them. Okay, John.
Sure. I guess the main issue I had was with the fill and what happens to the stormwater. That it appears the area being filled, I believe it's on the eastern portion of the property. There's a distinct low point. It's almost a pocket in there. I think it goes down to elevation 19, where the grades around that area are probably 21, 22. So presently it's an area where water collects and gets stored and probably slowly infiltrates into the ground. By filling in that area, we're displacing that storage volume. But what's more of a concern is the area, the neighboring properties are very flat. And it appears that neighborhood has an elevation about 22 in that area. And I'm just not sure what's going to happen to the stormwater off-site when you push that water onto adjacent properties. And that's probably the main point there. Where is it going to go, and who may it affect in the neighborhood? And it appears the house just to the east of the property is a low-lying home, probably around that 22, 23 elevation. And we just have to make sure that it's not going to impact that home, or possibly the home just north of it.
For the record, Rob Frangione, Frangione Engineering. Yes, so what the homeowner had desired is a flatter backyard, and that's why this grading plan is what it is. He acquired the property next door, which I believe was part of the subdivision. And, he wanted to have a flatter backyard. So what we'll do as part of the revision to this plan is we'll take a look at that grading, fine tune it. You're correct, there is a topographic low spot on the eastern side. And, we are gonna have to come back with an amended plan. As far as the stormwater, I envision there's a large Coltex system on the property already from when the house was developed. The plan going forward, I envision taking some of the runoff from the existing carriage house and some of the patio that's up adjacent to the carriage house, between the pool and the carriage house, maybe adding some more Coltex in that area, which is more upland. The pool, as you know, pools basically hold their own water. That's their function, is to hold water. They don't generate runoff, so I'm not concerned with runoff from a pool. And then for the other patios, if we have it's almost like a divergent outfall method, where we take some impervious areas from upstream, detain that, and let the other ones go. And by other ones, I mean the eastern and northern patio around the pool. So I think we can make that work. Obviously, I have to run the numbers and do the analysis and resubmit all that, but that's the plan going forward.
So I'm wondering, what's the quantity of fill that you need? If you're looking to basically fill 2/3 of an acre and bring it up 3 feet, 3.5 feet? How much fill is that? How many truckloads are we talking about?
That's a number I'd have to run. I don't have that number offhand.
Okay, and if you're filling that, I'm assuming you're not actually putting any stormwater management practices in there, because I don't think you can put Coltex into fill.
Yeah, and that's the problem I have with the New York State Stormwater Manual. They don't let you put Coltex in fill. I mean, here in Connecticut, we do it all the time. I don't know why things are so different, but I know what the manual says. I professionally disagree with it. That being said, we do have an area where the existing Coltex are that meets the 3-foot separation above groundwater guideline. We can put more Coltex next to that if that's the case, and we go from there. So.
Yeah, it's just a very, very, very wet site, and the more that gets affected, I am concerned about the neighbors. I'm glad you are too. Can you just tell me, is it normal practice in the off season of swimming? Are pools drained nowadays? Do they winter over empty?
Yes, there's typically like an 18-inch drawdown during the winter, so that if the pool surface freezes and the water level expands, so there's some expansion availability. So there's still, typically in a swimming pool, you've got about a 7-inch of freeboard from the coping to the water level. You don't have the water level all the way at the coping, because as soon as you jump in it, all the water goes away. So there's some storage built into the swimming pool. And then in the winter, we draw it down. So as the ice forms in it and it lifts up a little bit, it's not breaking out and busting the coping. And it can, that's part of the expansion of effects of the ice. So that's why there's a drawdown.
Okay, so I'm wondering, so in this new area that the pool will be situated in, have you tested to see where the water table is, because I'm concerned, the pool could end up popping out if there's a lot of water pressure coming up from down below in groundwater.
When pools are built, they have hydrostatic pressure relief valves in the bottom. There's usually 2 valves or 2 drains down in the bottom of the deep end. And so that if the pool was completely empty and you had a groundwater condition, it doesn't float the pool, because I've seen that where pools were constructed without these hydrostatic pressure relief valves, and it's like a bathtub, and it pops the bathtub out of the ground. So the new pool will have to be built, as is customary with swimming pools built nowadays, to have hydrostatic pressure relief valves.
So you just install a pool with those release valves, and you don't actually check the conditions of the water table below, or the
well, we excuse me, we do know the groundwater table because we did do test holes in that area. That groundwater elevation relative to the pool is irrelevant because of the hydrostatic pressure relief valves. So even if there's water in the bottom of the pool, which there's always going to be some water in the pool, the upward pressure of the groundwater is going to be driven down by the head of the water in the pool itself. You know, deep end's 8.5 feet deep. Even if it was drawn down 18 inches, you've got about 6.5 feet of water that's pressing down on the groundwater.
Okay, so thank you for that clarification about how deep the pool is going to be, because that makes a difference with that. Okay, so one final question. Do you have a current survey of conditions right now on that property with contour lines, not just on the applicant's property, but offsite as well?
Well, so we do have some contours on the south side of the notch from the, if you imagine that this property kind of looks like the state of Oklahoma.
Well, do you have something you could share your screen?
Oh, can I
with
share my
us?
screen? Okay, I didn't know
Please.
if that was the case. Let me do that. Okay, can you see the site plan?
Not yet, there.
Here we go.
Okay. So, you know, we have the topo here. Here's that little low spot. You know, we have this 21 contour coming from the neighbor. This 21 contour kind of dies in from the neighbor. And then there's this lot here that shows it's a little bit higher in here. We don't have any topo on here. And customarily, we don't do that, or that's not done because the surveyor, I believe, would have to get permission from the adjacent property owner to go on their property to do that. So I believe that's why it wasn't done at the time.
But wouldn't that solve the problem of then knowing for sure that this should not impact the neighbors in terms of exacerbating the flooding in that area and potentially onto their property? Because I see that low area is about 19 or 20 feet.
Mhm.
And the other property, 888, is at over 25 feet. I'd be very interested to know what the neighbor's property, the Verney property, is relative, because we all know water is going to seek its own level, and it's probably not going to flow onto 888. It's going to go straight on to the Verney property.
Right. It's also important to remember that this is all lawn now. And in fact, this back area, when we did the test holes, was all like, it was all scrub. And I believe there was some demolition that had been done for the old house that was there. And there were things that were back there. This is all going to be lawn back here. So, you know, the condition that it's in, it's a very poor condition now. That's going to get better when it's a manicured lawn, because it'll slow the water down and will allow the water to, you know, seep in a little bit more.
Well, probably not so much when we have, you know, 3 inches an hour for 2 or 3 hours in a row like we just had. I mean, I for one would like to see topo lines on the neighbor's property, because I think the worst thing we can do is, and we're not allowed to, impact the neighbor's property with flooding.
Right.
Because I do know where this site is, and I've driven past it, and I see the water that sits there. I'm particularly sensitive to that. And while the lawn will help, I would like to have some assurance that, you know, oh, this is a little higher than that, a little, it's too loosey-goosey for me. I don't know how anybody else feels.
I just don't know if we're allowed to trespass on the Verney property to get survey information. So
well, if
I
they
have to find out about that.
Okay, I mean, I can't, it would be to their benefit. So maybe they'll say no, I understand that.
John, what do you think?
The Westchester County GIS has topo for the whole area. And you can take a look, it's 2-foot contour topo.
2-foot contours.
Yeah.
Right.
So it's pretty much a very flat area where the on-site pocket is the low point. And I think most of the drainage probably ends up on this site, on the eastern end of it. I don't know how you fill the site and push the water where it's going to go. It's very hard to, even with 2-foot contour, it's very hard to see what direction the water is going to go and whether it's just going to sit there or build to a higher elevation on the adjacent properties.
Mm-hmm.
So you probably need a detailed topographic survey along the property lines. You should look at the elevations of the existing homes to make sure we can move the water off the properties to the roadway drainage system before it builds to an elevation that it could impact a neighboring home.
Okay. I'll talk to the surveyor and see if we can get some shots maybe on the property line. You know, again, I'll have to talk to him as to what the legalities of you know, holding the rod on someone else's property are.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Thank you. Okay. Take the drawing down.
Sorry.
That's okay. This way we can see people better. Does anybody else have any questions for the engineer or for John, our engineer?
I would just like to say that I'm a little concerned that the applicant was kind of dismissive of the New York State stormwater rules. I mean, we're not in Connecticut. You're looking to fill, it looks like the entire backyard would have fill in it. And the law is that the stormwater system cannot be located in fill. So, you know, I just have a concern about that and would like to see that remedy.
My comments are based on my over 25 years of experience in professional engineering. So, and having designed quite possibly hundreds of stormwater detention systems. So, you know, if it was a little bit dismissive, I apologize for that. I'm allowed to have my opinion as to the stormwater manual and its efficacy.
Rob, is there? You follow the rules of the state you're in.
I know, and I do follow the rules. Doesn't mean I agree with them, but I follow them.
I'm sorry, Frank.
Is there a retaining wall on that proposal?
Yes.
Is it in that area in the, was it the south portion of that property?
Yes. Which, if we're going to be revising this grading plan, there's a good chance that that retaining wall will go away. Because I think that the crux of the fill is on that southern portion of the property line.
I ask.
Yeah, and so if that fill, you know, as part of our revised site plan, if that gets, if the fill pack gets revised, it's quite possible that that retaining wall is no longer necessary.
So then the chances are the Coltex are going to go to the original system.
Yes, the Coltex are to the west of the property, the existing Coltex. There's 40 of them there. That's where we would be forced to put additional Coltex. So that's where the better soils are on the property.
Okay. Okay. Susan Oakley, I think you made some comments on this application. I don't know to weigh in here.
Yes, my comments were about the cultivars of the selected plants and that they mature to very tall sizes. And I think by making minor adjustments to the type of plant selected, they would just be better suited for that situation.
Okay.
I made some suggestions in the.
Did you receive Susan's comments?
Hi, yes, I'm Rosalie Asani. I'm the landscape designer. I did receive the comments.
Okay.
I can can I share my screen because I have images of the plants? I do really like, you know, some of the suggestions she made. However, this property has deer. So one of the plants, you know, wouldn't survive those conditions. So that's kind of why we picked what we did. So let me share the screen and I can show you what our approach is. Where is it? Oh, here we go. Can you see the screen?
Yes.
Okay.
It's kind of small, maybe larger a little.
I don't know how to make it bigger. Oh, here we go. I can zoom.
There you go.
So, yes, so we have an arborvitae hedge along the back. So the whole idea is to give privacy to the neighbors as well as the homeowners, mutual privacy, because they want to be good neighbors.
Well, it's also required by code.
Right, as well. Yes, but we went a little bit taller, I think, which I guess was the comment, the concern that it was eventually going to outgrow its situation. So we have arborvitae here, and then we have arborvitae here. And the plant we proposed is deer resistant. It's green giant arborvitae, and here's a picture of it being maintained as a hedge. So it's one of those plants that, you know, the landscapers will be, you know, shearing every year to control its size. And they're coming in at 12 to 14 feet high. So that's the reason why we have that plant there. And if we were to switch to the emerald greens, I'm just concerned that the deer would kill the plants because it's one of their favorites. Over here, we have spruce trees because it's over an acre and a half, you know, almost 2 acres. It's a big field. So we wanted to give it some dimension. And here's a photograph of the spruce trees to give it some three-dimensionality. So if we go with something really narrow for that long of a run, I'm just a little bit concerned it might look a little out of scale with how big the backyard is. But I can certainly look at the options and see if I can come up with something that, I think your concern was you don't want something that gets too tall. So I can take a look at it and get back to you. I mean, my approach with these trees though, is the landscapers handle them and they control the size once they reach a certain height. You know, so this is a, you know, private home. They're going to be maintaining it.
Well, spruce trees aren't traditionally sheared.
No, they candle it. So what they do is they pinch it back and it keeps it dense so it doesn't turn into a big leggy monster essentially.
Is there deer fencing around this property?
No. And in fact, actually the pool fence is just a pool fence and the deer can jump over it. And we're only fencing around the pool itself right here.
Well, it was my suggestion to the board that the plant types be reconsidered just simply because the spruce that you're indicating can get 40 to 60 feet high. So if you could give it some thought, would be only it would be my suggestion.
Okay.
Just given the shadow effect that those may have on neighboring properties also.
Okay. I'll take a look at it. I mean, we do plan to plant them well inside the property so that they don't, because there's so much room on that side. You know, the lawn is pretty large there. So, but I'll take a look at it. If the concern is about the height, I can see if there's something. I mean, we do want it to be high enough to, you know, cover the windows and give mutual privacy. So, but maybe something not quite so high. I'll take a look. Okay.
Okay, any members of the planning board have any other comments or questions on this application at this point in time? Okay, so you all will address the comments that you've received, and when you're finished and submit the paperwork, we'll get you on an agenda.
Thank you very much.
I had one last question. Mr. Kellard, I actually pulled up the Westchester County mapping, and you're pretty much on the money. I mean, elevation 22 seems to be all around this property towards Skibo. I mean, would there be an issue if we basically produce this map? Because it doesn't seem like it would make any sense to get a surveyor to comb a property for 2 or 3 inch. I mean, there's a 22-foot contour on Skibo Lane running on both sides, so it's dead level.
And I could take those contours from the GIS.
We could trace them.
And put them on the site plan and just, you know, cite that it was from the GIS map as opposed to a field run topo. John, you okay with that?
But we don't know the elevations of the homes. That's the critical aspects of it.
The first floor level?
Yeah.
Of which homes? Because that could be very complicated.
Probably the 2 lots to the east of this property.
I may be able to do some research. Maybe able to find that at the building department.
Yep. There you go.
With an existing survey.
Right.
Ashley, were you agreeing with that?
Yes, that's what I was suggesting, is that you could foil it from the building department. They should have a survey or proposed site plan on, or building plans on file.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks.
Okay. I think then we're done with this application for this evening, and we'll see you when you come back. Okay. Thank you. This brings us to the next item on the agenda, which is another multi-story building in the flood zone, 572 Van Rans Place. So everything we said before applies to this application as well. This is the first time this application is before us. This is the beginning of the process. We will type it for secret and declare the intent for us to be lead agency. And this application, just like the other one, has to go to the zoning board and to HCZM, and also other places as well. We have to get comments from county planning department because it's within 500 feet of the river, and the county health department, but our planner can explain that. Let's promote the people who are going to present this application to us.
Kathy, could I just say something before we start? I know we had neighbors who felt that the meeting had not been properly noticed.
Yes.
And I don't know whether we have evidence that it was, and if not, whether that means that we can't hear the application or we just wouldn't have the public hearing. What's our feeling about that?
I don't know if the applicant knows this. We received an email late this afternoon from a resident of the neighboring building that only two, according to that email, that two apartments in the building received the notice of tonight's meeting, and the rest of the residents did not. I don't know, because we have no one in the planning department who is checking. I know the applicant is required to notice and then send an affidavit, a notarized statement to the planning department stating that the notices were all done. I have no idea what happened with that, and there's no one here to ask at this point in time. I would defer to Teresa, who's fading into the background, as far as whether or not, since we're not holding a public hearing and it's just the beginning of the application and we're not really accomplishing much today except starting the process. I don't know if legally we can proceed at this point in time. Teresa, you're muted, but if you want to weigh in. I sent you, that email was sent to the planning board members, not to you and to Ashley. I forwarded to you, but it was rather late in the day when it came to us. And then when I forwarded to you, it was even later. So I don't know if you saw it.
Yeah, I did see the comment. Because we're not having a public hearing tonight, this is just the first discussion of this. I don't see any problem with proceeding. There'll be another opportunity to send out notices, and what we'll do before those go out is we'll have an opportunity to see who was missed, if anyone, so that we can make sure that they get the notice next time. And as we're sitting here tonight, I don't have a copy of the notices that went out. I don't know, Ashley, if you do. But we'll certainly check on that, but that's no reason not to discuss the application tonight. You're not going to take action on it. You're not even having a public hearing, and you're clearly going to have a public hearing on this, given the concern that the board has with the flooding that's occurred. So I think it's better to give the applicant comments so that they can provide the additional information that's needed in order to continue the review of the project.
Well, and
Okay.
I would think it would be helpful to anybody who's watching or sees this subsequently, if they hear more about the project from the applicant, they may have more questions, which then they could bring to us at the real public hearing.
Right, at the actual public hearing. And also, as we've mentioned many times this evening, you can always send comments in writing, whether there's an open public hearing or not. This board tends to read and act on comments if they're appropriate.
Yeah,
Okay.
and Kathy, can I just add one more thing as well? This is regarding the floodplain development permit. I just want to let people know that the floodplain development permit is issued by the building inspector as one of the building permits for the project. But regardless of that, the planning board can ask for all of that information to be provided up front as part of the seeker review. So I think between the comments from the board and the comments from the public, I think what you're looking for to really evaluate these projects is all of the floodplain information that they would have to provide for such a permit in order to make sure that we have all the appropriate information for John, your engineer, to review, and for you guys to review also as planning board members. So, you know, that the reason why it's not checked off on the determination is that we're not at that stage of the process. But you can ask for all that information, and you're entitled to get all that information as part of the seeker review.
Okay. But the actual paperwork, the actual application doesn't come to the planning board. It goes.
No, it does not. That's right.
So the fact that it's not part of our package is because it doesn't belong in our package.
That's
well, I've always seen them. They contain information that's important. I think maybe, so that was maybe more of a courtesy, but as a
Right.
plan going forward, I think whatever reviewing board should see that floodplain
Right.
permit application information, because it's really relevant.
Right, right. So we can either get the information on the application or we can get the information by asking for it. But right, okay, all right. Thank you, Teresa. We'll straighten it out. Ashley?
I'd just like to point out that there are a number of attendees that are putting comments in the Q&A box. Those are not being recorded and they will not be responded to. So what you should do is take any comments that you're putting in that Q&A box, put them in a letter or an email and direct it to the planning department at the village so that they can become part of the record.
Right, we can't use the chat function here because it doesn't get recorded as the record, and this is the official record of the meeting. So the chat function was disabled, and the Q&A we can't deal with it. Okay, so unfortunately.
I did happen to look at some of the questions, and I think we should make it clear that this is the planning board. Any variances or the list of variances, that goes to the zoning board.
Right.
So that has to be done before we can do real substantive work. So I think people should watch, and I would assume that they would get notice when the zoning board has this on their agenda. So probably the notice issue needs to be resolved sooner rather than later.
Okay. Once again, we'll state once again, this particular application is before the planning board. They have to get, they've also requested variances that goes to the zoning board. They also have to go to HCZM for consistency with the LWRP. And that all has to happen before we can look at the site plan. Do we need a special permit for this one also?
No.
Cheat sheet. No, so all we're doing is site plan with review for this application, which we can't do until we have a complete application from the zoning board and we have consistency for HCZM.
Oh, and so I just noticed, I'm sorry, people are looking for the email address of the planning board, or where should their comments go?
Currently, they're being accepted by Barbara Ritter, and I'm going to put that in the email, in the chat, or answer.
Okay, so they would go to Barbara Ritter at the Village of Mamanic, which is.
So it's britter@vomny.org, right?
And it's also available on the village website.
Yes, if you go to the planning department website or page on the website, it has Barbara Ritter, office assistant, it has her phone number and her email.
Okay. So let's go back again. this is the first time this application is before a land use board. And so we're starting the process. Our goal tonight is to take this for the environmental review process and to declare our intent to become lead agency, because by law, we have to send out a notice of intent to other agencies, and we have 30 days for them to reply to that. So that's what we're doing. That's what we're doing here tonight. But before we can do that, we have to have a sense of what the project is. And I'm going to turn the mic over to Mr. Joffrey, who I believe you're going to be representing the applicant. So why don't you give us an overview of the project, and then anyone else from your team who is going to speak, you'll take it from there. Okay?
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the board. Good to see you all this evening. I'm here on behalf of 572 Van Rance Place LLC, which is proposing a site plan application for premises located at 572 Van Rance Place in the village of Mamanic. Ashley, while I'm doing my initial comments, if you could kindly, if John Sullivan has called in, if you can elevate him to a panelist as well, please. And I'm joined this evening by Michael Stein, who is on the screen, who's our engineer for the project from Hudson Engineering, John Sullivan, our architect, and the owners, Brendan Ahern and Jerry Ryan. They were on the road earlier. I don't know if they're available, if they can be elevated to panelists as well. Madam Chair, before I get into the actual proposal, I'd just like to address the comments regarding notice. We did submit on September 16th by Federal Express to your attention at the planning board and the village of Mamanic, the return of notice that included a proof of mailing affidavit, the affidavits with respect to the notification. We've included the green cards, the mailing, and all of the information. We can certainly circle back to confirm that all of the appropriate parties have been noticed. To the extent that anybody has been missed, we will certainly make every effort to make sure that that is corrected. I do note that some of the certified mails that we did send out were returned as undeliverable. I'm looking at my screen right now, and because of the way the post office marked them as undeliverable, I can't determine right now who that was, but we will certainly make sure we address those notice issues, and that we continue to make sure that notice was done as we believe it's been effectuated properly in accordance with all applicable laws.
Okay, thank you.
So with that, the subject premises is located at 572 Van Rance, as I indicated. It's an approximately 6,500 square foot lot that's currently improved with a two-family residential structure and an associated parking area that was constructed in about 1925. The premises is classified in an RM3 residential zoning district, and multifamily residential use is a principally permitted use in that district. And as you're all aware, the area is comprised of primarily of commercial and multifamily residential buildings. There's a park across the street, and immediately adjacent to the parcel is a very large 5-story multifamily building. So our proposal, we respectfully submit, fits within the context of the surrounding area. The premises is also located in the AE flood zone. It should be noted that the existing structure is not compliant with the Village of Mamanic Floodplain Development Code requirements for residential structures within the floodplain. Our proposed development, we are proposing to replace the existing residential structure and construct a sustainable 5-story multifamily residential building that could be comprised of 10 units. There'll be 6 one-bedroom units and 4 two-bedroom units, and parking will be provided within a garage located on the ground floor of the building. And Mr. Sullivan can walk you through the site plan in a moment. But I did want to address some of the flood zone comments. We heard a lot of comments this evening in relation to other applicants that are in the area. We did submit to the planning board as Exhibit C of our September 1st submission, the flood development permit application. So you do have that in your package. And it should be noted that this proposed building will be located above the base flood elevation and will fully comply with the construction standards for residential buildings in accordance with section 186.5 of the Flood Development Code and all applicable FEMA construction standards. And Michael Stein is on the call this evening that can go over some of the initial comments as it relates to stormwater. 2 other comments before I turn it over to Mr. Sullivan. It's important to note, and we included in our application materials, Some highlights with respect to the green features that'll be incorporated in the sustainable development: rooftop solar installation, 4 EV charging stations for electric vehicles, as well as a state-of-the-art fuel system, which is very beneficial for the project. And we'd also like to note that we included a socioeconomic evaluation, and that only one school-age child is anticipated to be generated from this proposal. So it's an overview of the project. With that, I'd like to hand it over to Mr. Sullivan, and if he can share his screen so he can walk you through the proposal and the site plans, please.
Okay, good evening, everyone. Can you hear me? Because my screen keeps going on and off. I don't know whether it's on my side or if it's over there, so I apologize if we get disconnected.
Coming through loud and clear.
Thank you. So as introduced by Tony, yes, I'm John Sullivan, principal of Sullivan Architecture. And my associate, Greg Dallop, should be on here because Greg will be able to screen share our drawings, because I don't have them here to do that. So I'm not quite sure where he is. I don't see him on there, but maybe Ashley, if you see him there somewhere. Okay, great. That's who Greg is, by the way. He's with my firm. So as Tony said here, that obviously this is a very small parcel, 65 by 100. It's exactly a rectangle. There's no irregularities to the site. It's, for all intents and purposes, dead flat. It's approximately an elevation 20. And as you can see, if Greg can bring up the drawing here, we'll look at the first floor here, or the ground floor. So this is a combination sheet right here that has, as you can see, the colored version there is of the site, 65 wide by 100 feet deep. As you can see that there are no dwelling units that are on this level. The only things that are at this level are clearly an entrance into the building, which is the first floor is elevated approximately 12 feet above this elevation. So it's approximately at elevation 32 feet. From that point up, there are 4 floors of apartments, as Tony said, 6 one-bedrooms, 4 two-bedrooms. There are 3 units on the floor with 1 unit, 1 two-bedroom unit on the top floor. That they're reasonably sized. The parking, as you can see, for all intents and purposes, is on grade. It's really not a parking structure, and it's not even a garage. You can faintly see on the drawing how the outline of the footprint of the building above, where there are columns, that even the majority of the parking spaces are exposed to rain. They're not even 100% covered. So it's pretty much taken the site as it sits, putting a connector, meaning vertical connector, as you can see on the left, between stairs, elevators. We'll talk about the fuel cells in that mechanical room in a moment. But, and then above that are the floors, with 3 on the floor, as I said, and 1 on the top floor. What's really making this project for us quite exciting is that our clients are engaged in some incredibly sustainable building systems. We believe that this building could serve as an excellent model because we're going to introduce what's generally known as fuel cells. And you can even see it as it's noted on that one little mechanical room down below, which we will now relocate to the roof. Greg, if you could slide the plan over so we could take a quick look at just the upper roof plan. It's in the lower right corner. You can see that we initially showed solar panels here. Well, behind that stairwell that you see on that floor plan too, we will now relocate a mechanical room and put the fuel cells up here so that there will be no mechanical equipment or room on the ground level, hence as a result of what we've all just experienced here. So we can dive into what this is all about, but this building will reduce the carbon footprint by minimally 58 to 60% because of the use of these fuel cells and as a result of the solar panels. Yeah, we still need a natural gas connection, but the system is quite exciting. It's not really introduced that much here in America. It's quite popular in Europe, and these guys have developed this system here And we're pretty excited about using it, particularly in some of our affordable housing projects that we have as well. And we'd love to have it, used here with this building. The rest of the building can be about as sustainable as it can be. I happen to be a Fitwell ambassador. For those of you who are not familiar with Fitwell, it is somewhat of a similar system that LEED, which we're all probably quite familiar with, but Fitwell deals more with the health and safety of the residents, not necessarily about the building materials and how it's used. So again, I'd love to have further conversation with all of you about that, hopefully, as we get and navigate through this process. And I would welcome that. But we think we have an opportunity here. And even as Tony said, we very much modeled this. If you want to go to the next drawing for us, Greg, we very much modeled this architecturally similar to the building that is next to us. Maybe we jump to the last one, Greg, which is the photo montage that we put together here. As you can see, it's an actual photograph, and we superimpose our building on here. It obviously, by the perspective, it probably looks a little taller than the adjacent one, but it actually isn't. You can see that building has a first floor garage level. The building is set on a podium. It has 4 floors. Ours has 4 floors on the front. It's only 3 floors, by the way, on the back, because that's only 1 unit on the top floor. So apologize for my voice, by the way, I'm losing it a bit, but in any event, we think that we have something that could be a continuation of the streetscape that exists here, and a building that could be potentially a model in how we're going to build it for others. I realize that we have a lot of issues to talk about. We've heard you guys today. We're quite familiar with what's happened in Mamanic as well as elsewhere, and with the flooding. So we want to deal with that. We want to try to do our best to deal with that. Obviously, as you can see, we don't have any spaces other than exits and entrance to the building that are on grade level. I think that Michael can speak a little bit about how he can address stormwater retention on the site, et cetera. And again, we just look forward to maybe going through this process with you. Tony?
Michael, would you like to address some of the initial comments for stormwater?
Sure. I can just do a brief overview of the stormwater. If you want to just unshare, I can put my drawings up. So again, very similar to the other application at 715. The first thing we did was we came out and did some field testing, deep hole testing to see what the soil conditions were like. We encountered groundwater at a depth of 84 inches, and we had very favorable percolation rates. So in this case, we actually, once the runoff is collected, it is put through a mechanical separator and put into an infiltration system. In this case, we infiltrated all the runoff for all storms up to and including the 100-year storm event. So in this case, we're going above and beyond what the village's requirements are. And we're also, all that water is basically being infiltrated, so it's being taken away, so it's an improvement over existing conditions. We also went through, did an analysis, and I'm not sure if it had been submitted, because I think that was one of the comments Mr. Keller had. It was a volumetric analysis to make sure that we're not decreasing the volumetrics flood volume on the property. We're comparable, or in this case, we actually have more compensatory storage in a proposed condition. So this will not be filling in the flood zone and causing any further issues. The comments we had gotten from Keller Sessions' office, very similar to the comments we had received on 715 Mamanic. And again, we'll work to address all the comments with their office.
Thank you, Mr. Stein. Madam Chair, we also are in receipt of memoranda from Terabella as well as from AKRF. Obviously, in just receiving those, did not want to make a late submission to you, but we will certainly provide a supplemental submission addressing any comments that are raised in those memoranda. And that concludes our presentation. We look forward to commencing this process with you, as was discussed with other applications. And at the beginning of this application, this is the first presentation, the first appearance of this matter on your agenda. There's a lot of work that needs to be done, but we'd ask that you circulate your intent for lead agency status so that we can commence the process. And similar to a prior application, we would look to appear before the Harbor Coastal Zone Management Commission, as well as the Zoning Board of Appeals, while we start the secret process with your board, if you intend on declaring your intent to be lead agency.
Thank you. Okay. Why don't we hear from Ashley? I know you did a memo on this, if you want to just weigh in, and then if any members of the planning board have any questions for either you or any of the applicants' team, we can take them then.
Sure. So we just did a quick overview memo pointing out some of the approvals that are required for this project. I do anticipate we'll have some additional comments going forward, but just to get the project started, we recommend that the board declare its intent to be lead agency for an unlisted and coordinated action under seeker, and it also needs to be referred to Westchester County under 239M.
Okay. Anybody have any questions before we proceed with typing it for seeker as unlisted and declare the intent to declare ourselves lead agency so that can be circulated around to the other agencies? Nobody? Okay.
I'll make the motion to classify as unlisted, and we should be the lead agency.
Okay. Do I have a second on that?
Do we want to include the referral to the county?
I don't
The
think.
same
It's
motion?
automatic. Has to.
Yeah, so we don't need a
It
motion.
has to, you know, yeah.
Okay.
I like to put it on the memo just so I make sure we remember that we do it. But it is administrative.
Okay, so I'll second that.
Okay. Ellen? Cindy?
Yes.
Richard?
Yes.
And I vote yes. Okay, so we'll do that. You have some preliminary initial comments from our consultants. You know, we can open this up to if anybody is raising their hand. I think we covered most of the issues, and it sounds like you all were watching the meeting. You were here and heard the comments for 715 Mamanic. This is just around the corner. So obviously all the comments are the same. I don't know if anyone wants to add anything new. I think we covered, and thank you for including the flood development permit so that we can get started on that, because as Ashley pointed out, we'll have to start the secret review before you come back from zoning. So well, let's assume you get your variances. Or as Mr. Noel pointed out, you won't come back. All right. Is there anyone who's got their hand raised?
There are. I'm going to unmute Larry Cohen.
Thank you. I do congratulate it. It's a good-looking design. I'm president of 100 Sheldrake, your neighbor. Just as a point right now, if you'd be so kind as to ask whoever's owning the property this time, the debris from Ida has still not been cleaned up on that property, and it has become an eyesore within the neighborhood. That is appreciated. Thank you.
We'll certainly follow up on that. Thank you for your comment.
Thank you.
Okay. Anybody have anything regarding this project?
There's Stuart Teekert.
Okay.
You're unmuted.
Yes, and I'm happy to see that there's a floodplain development permit. I have a question about the process. On most of your applications now, there's what's called an application summary sheet. Is this a Village of Mamanic document, or is this the planner's document or something? I'm unclear what it is.
It's a document that AKRF produces for the benefit of the planning board members to see what permits are required as it goes through the process. You know, it has a brief summary of the meetings, and it gets updated for each meeting.
Okay. I'm looking at it now. I don't see where there's a check off for floodplain development permit. Am I missing it?
Well, it's not a land use permit, as was discussed, so that's why it's not on there.
It's not an action the planning board has to,
Belong to the building departments too.
right? We had a conversation.
Okay, but you receive it, you received one here, right?
Right, this is a summary sheet that's designed to help the boards, and it only identifies the permits that are within the board's jurisdiction, specifically the
So-
planning board.
Okay, what, I have a question about the floodplain development permit and perhaps the building inspector, if he's still here, can answer. There are a bunch of items on page 2, section 3.
Mr. Teagat, I'm going to interrupt you. I'm sorry, because we have other items on the agenda tonight, and this is not a planning board issue. If you have questions for the building inspector with regards to something that the building inspector is responsible for, I'm going to ask you to take it offline from the planning board.
Okay, basically,
Okay. Anyone else?
they're asking me to go to Black
Anything-
Hole Cafe.
have any comments? Anybody else have any comments with regard to this application and the planning board?
No, there's no other hands raised.
Okay. Okay, so we're going to move on to the next item on the agenda. Okay, thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much. Have a good evening.
Thank you too.
We'll see you in 30 days or thereabouts. Right. Okay, this brings us to the last item on the agenda. For something completely different. We have an application from 1600 Harrison Avenue for the recertification of the special use permit for the wireless antennas for the building. This is something that apparently is done by code every so often. This is not the first time this has been. In fact, it's not even the second time. So we have a lot of documents and we have hotel with us. Okay, you can, yes, why don't you present to the board and to the public what this is, and it seems pretty perfunctory. Right, okay.
It is indeed. Good evening, Madam Chair. It's nice to see you and members of the planning board again. For the record, Kristen Motel from Cuddy and Fader for AT&T. As you're aware, we filed for a recertification of the existing special use permit that's located at 1600 Harrison Avenue. That's an existing co-located rooftop wireless facility. The special permit was initially granted in 2005, and recertifications have been granted every 5 years as the code requires since that time. There is no upgrade proposed right now for the facility, so there's no change. We're just asking for the 5-year recertification. I did have a conversation with your attorney, Teresa, a few days ago, who requested that we submit just some updated certifications from our engineers, confirming that structurally and from a radio frequency standpoint, there haven't been any changes in the last 5 years. We submitted those letters late yesterday, and I also want to clarify what else was submitted because I just wanted the board to have a full record. We became aware that there were very minor upgrades in 2018, and what I mean when I say that is they were antenna swaps. So they were like for like, they went through the building department. They didn't require any kind of recertification from the planning board, but I also provided you with those updated drawings and reports just so that we have a full record here so that in another 5 years, should we be here again, everything is complete. But just to confirm, there are no upgrades proposed at this time. And we submitted the certifications saying that the facility remains the same for all intents and purposes. So we would ask that the recertification be granted tonight. And I'm happy to answer any questions. It's just me. I don't have a whole team.
We have Tony here for moral support.
Ah, okay, great.
Okay. does anyone on our staff want to add anything? I know, Teresa, you worked on this with Kristen.
Yeah, the only thing I would add is the reason why I asked for the updated reports is because they hadn't been updated in a substantial period of time. I think some of the RFG report and the structural report really went back at least 2 certifications. So I thought it was important to get them updated as of this date. So we would have that for the record. And it really is required by the code that the town has, that the planning board look at these certification or look at these updates at the time they do the certification. It's all laid out very clearly in the telecommunications law there that you have. Now, we did get these very late yesterday. I did not have a chance to look at them between now and then. So I'm going to suggest that you defer action on this. I'm sure the planning board members are going to want to take a look at it, refresh your recollection before we do the certification. There's time to do this, and I don't really think it sets a good precedent to get something a day before you make a determination on it, particularly when it's something that's required by the code and it's part of the recertification process. The other thing they've asked for here is a waiver of the recertification process going forward. They previously asked for that several years ago. The planning board did not grant that request, but at that time determined that it was best to have them continue to come back for the recertifications. That's within the power of the planning board and your discretion. And I would submit that you would probably want to think about that before the next meeting and whether or not you feel you no longer need to do the certifications. From my perspective and my perspective only, one of the certifications has to do with the structural stability of the installation. I believe this is on top of a building, correct, Kristen?
Yes, that's right.
And so I can only assume that the law was drafted the way it was, and I believe it was the work of one of the planning board members, in fact, on the law, was because they wanted to take a periodic look at what was going on with the structure of the antenna and everything else. So, but again, up to the board, and I think we can certainly be prepared with a memo for the next meeting. But I would kind of like to have a heads up from you all if you think you would like to no longer do the certifications and grant the waiver, or what's the board's pleasure on that?
If I could I just make a few comments on that before the board discusses, just to add some information, if that's all right with you, Teresa?
Sure.
So part of the reason that we requested that previously, and we are requesting it again, is that the federal law and guidance on the Telecommunications Act has been amended since the last amendments have been made to this section of the code. And that clarification pretty much says that the local municipality has to approve and can't deny these eligible facility requests under the Telecommunications Act. And what those eligible facility requests are facilities exactly like this that are on a rooftop. T-Mobile and Sprint were up there, so it's co-located. We're not proposing any amendments. And if amendments are proposed, we do have to go through the building department for that. And in this case, we would submit that local review isn't required or should be expedited. And every 5 years having to recertify, even like in this case where we're not proposing any amendment, just seems a little burdensome to the applicant. So we would request that that be either waived, or maybe every 10 years would be a more reasonable check-in.
Thank you. Okay, so the law's changed since our code was written. I think that's what you're saying.
The law and further federal guidance has come down since then, yes.
Okay.
So let me ask you this, Kristen, is that information included anywhere in your application, and could you direct the planning board members to where that is?
Sure. So page 2 of our cover letter cites the statute, and there's a footnote to the act. And if the planning board decides that they would like to delay action until October on this, we'd be happy to submit a supplemental that talks a little bit more about this specifically and our request to be excused from the 5-year recertification.
I love how this is in the middle class tax relief and job. I didn't know we had middle class tax relief.
Yeah, and I do, Kristen, appreciate all that you gave us by way of the history and everything on this. That was very helpful in terms of reviewing it. And we certainly are in agreement that it's a type 2 action as a renewal or a recertification. So
do we have to declare that tonight, or just?
You can do that when you actually do the recertification or grant the variance or grant the waiver, whatever you would like to do.
I don't know how the board feels, but I feel like I didn't pick up on the request. I read through this. I remember when this law was passed. I don't know why.
Kathy, if I may, I was on the planning board the last time this item came up.
Really?
And I also experienced this in my own building. T-Mobile has an antenna on my roof.
Okay.
And the Kristen is right. The federal law did change. So it's kind of stupid because even if we voted against it, the feds automatically grant this. But I do want to point out that this is the only opportunity you would have to comment. So if there's a problem, it's the only way you can make it public. There's no way to stop it, but it's a good way to discuss it.
Okay.
I would add that if there is ever a problem with any of these towers, it could be referred to the building inspector, and the building department could issue a violation.
But the feds are, the language is very strict. That was
No,
my
I mean, I'm saying
experience
like if there's an issue with the safety issues, with, if the structure was failing in some way, those types of safety issues could be addressed through the building department.
It might be, the applicant to get a third-party inspection every 5 years to verify the structure.
Wouldn't the owner of the building, though, be up on the roof if there's some like problem with an antenna falling over or anything like that? Wouldn't they be the first people to notice that?
I think it's the responsibility of the people that are operating the telecommunications to certify and maintain.
Right, of course. But I'm just saying, how would we know as a planning board if there's a problem? I mean, you would know live there, but
when it falls over.
When it falls over, right. So the planning board would be totally unaware, and if it falls over, it would go to the building department. We would not be aware of anything.
Absolutely correct.
Right.
But when you give this certification every 5 years, that is indeed one of the questions that you ask. Okay, Kathy. So if there is a problem, that's most likely one of the points at which it would be discovered. Okay. So
Either that or I lose my cell phone service. That's how
maybe.
So I was going to suggest that AT&T does routinely inspect their sites, and they are in the business of providing reliable wireless service to their customers. They also have to comply with their lease terms with the landlord, and the periodic inspections isn't something that's required for other types of rooftop equipment in the village. And there is federal guidance on that as well, and not treating wireless telecommunication providers differently than other utility providers. So I would just.
They have good lobbyists in Washington, don't they? Right. Okay, all right. I don't know. Let's see what time it is. Getting late too. And we've had a lot of things going through our heads today. We can't approve it today anyway.
No.
We have to give Teresa some guidance on which way we're leaning so that in the next meeting, we can put this on the agenda and she can have a resolution ready for us. This has been done by resolution in the past, so we would have to do it by resolution again. So how do people feel? Do you want to weigh in on this, or do you want to?
Well, could I just ask Frank, do you think it appropriate that your guys would do an inspection in time for this?
You mean before the next meeting?
Yeah.
We could, but my recommendation is to have it done sporadically by a third party, either the supplier of this system or an engineer to look at it every so many years.
All right.
Because you don't want to wait till it falls off the building. You want.
No, absolutely.
Right.
But I'm trying to facilitate this recertification.
Yeah, sure.
I don't want to drag it out unnecessarily.
Right. Just so you know, currently, Frank, in the information that we have for tonight, which we received yesterday, it does cover the fact that it does cover the structural stability. Okay, so they have someone who's certified to that. So
That's what you need.
Good.
Yeah.
Okay, so we don't need it for this time. The question is going forward, if we waive the research going forward, how do we ensure structural stability continues?
I would argue against eliminating recertification.
Okay.
Well, I think we also established precedent. This is not the only cell tower we have in the village. Is that-
Right, exactly.
That's correct.
Right. This is not the only rooftop antenna installation in the village. In fact, there are probably more than we
know about.
know. Well, the village knows about them, but we don't know
We
about them.
don't. Right.
Okay, so it sounds like we're leaning against it, even though we can never not recertify. At least it gives the village an opportunity to make sure certain assurances are in place. Does that sum it up?
Yes.
Okay, so I'll
Okay.
prepare a resolution for recertification based on the ones that have been done before for the next meeting.
Right, and yeah, we can get it on the agenda for the 13th of October. And I think, Kristen, that's well within your requirements for your deadline, right? Because you did this way early. So congratulations on doing this early and not at the last minute. Okay, I think that is everything then. Okay, I can cross this off. We did that. Okay, thanks, everybody. This was an interesting meeting. Thank you for coming back. I hope everyone had a good summer. And we're back on, just for the people watching, or whether watching in person or watching again, we're back on Zoom. And I think the governor's orders that we can be on Zoom till the end of the year. So we are assuming we're going to be on Zoom till the end of the year. Currently, of course, the courtroom is being occupied by post-flood activities. So that's not available to us. So we will be continuing to do this remotely and streaming for the foreseeable future, at least to the end of the year, and see how things stand. Okay, I need a motion then to adjourn the meeting.
So moved.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Yes.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Ashley. Thank you, Teresa. Thank you, John.
Good to see you guys.
Susan, thank you. Good night, everybody.
Night.